Hello, and thank you for joining today. My name is Anya Kaplan, and I'm head of operations and events for the Fashion Scholarship Fund. Before we dive in, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. As many of us at this point are very familiar with Zoom, there are some great features that we encourage you to use. One of those features is the Q&A box. Feel free to send in your questions and we'll answer as many as possible during the Q&A segment of the discussion. And now I would like to introduce Senior Director of Education Programs at FSF, Marie Coletta.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are very excited to bring to you this elite group of HR representatives. So joining us today is Kristy Hurt, who is the executive recruiter and HR consultant for her own firm, Kristy Hurt Consulting. In addition, we have Erica Eimer, Vice President, Human Resources for a U.S. luxury fashion brand. In addition, we also have Sasha McNair, who is the Manager of Global Talent Acquisition and DEI at Tiffany & Co. And last but not least, we have Nicole Milner, who is the Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at J.Crew. At this point, I will turn it over to Kristy.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me to do this and lead this panel. And thank you to all the panelists for being here. And I'm just going to dig right in and give a little background on me and my career. And then I'm going to ask each of the other panelists to share their background, their career, and anything they'd like to highlight about their current focus, either in their current jobs or in general in terms of what they're focusing on, whether it be diversity, equity, inclusion, trends in hiring, talent acquisition, ways to stand out in the interview process, or what I will probably spend some time covering as well as networking, which I believe is one of the best ways to build your career. So a little bit about my background. I spent over 10 years working in the corporate fashion world before starting my own firm. So my first job was actually running stores for Kate Spade, and that was in New York City. I did work in retail in college, but I was a pre-med major, and I thought that I wanted to become a doctor. And I studied pre-med at University of Texas in Austin. And while I was working, while I was going to school, I was also working a part-time job in retail. And that was how I first got an interest in the fashion industry. So I worked at a small store in Austin, Texas called By George, which was great because I got experience selling, but also buying, because our store manager was also the buyer, and she bought both contemporary and designer brands, fashion, footwear, accessories. So we did everything from selling to pricing, making price tags, working directly with customers, clienteling, visual merchandising. So it was this very small, independently owned store, but we carried very well-known global brands in the store. So that was my first introduction to the fashion industry. And that was my first wake-up call. And I realized that, oh, this is actually a career choice and something I could choose to do. And it was also really fun. I'm an extrovert and I really like being on the selling floor and working with customers and working with product. So I decided not to go to medical school. I actually ended up later going to business school and getting an MBA. But first, I spent several years working for Kate Spade. So I moved to New York and I got a job working in the store. And I really wanted to highlight this because I think a lot of professionals graduate from college and don't consider working in retail as a viable option. And I actually think that, not only is it how I got started, but I think that it's an incredible opportunity to really learn a brand, to really interact with the product, to manage very large teams, large volumes of business, and even travel the world, working and running stores of increasingly higher volume, moving to different countries. I'll go into that a little bit more detail, but I do think working in the store, especially if you are someone who needs a paycheck right away, I always recommend even walking into stores that you love and talking to the teams, talking to the store managers, expressing your passion for the brand. Often stores have openings, and even if you have to start, as a part-time associate or as in the stockroom, those are all great opportunities to learn. And often if you do a great job, you can get promoted very quickly, which was what happened to me. So I started as an assistant manager in the store, and I very quickly got promoted to be store manager and then regional manager of stores. So within a year or two of, graduating from college, working the store, I was opening stores all over the country, training teams, hiring teams. So I realized that I had this passion for recruiting. We didn't have a very formal, HR department at that time because Kate Spade was in the very early days. It's much bigger now, but, I was in charge of onboarding, recruiting, training, everything. So I realized that that was something I really wanted to pursue. I ended up doing my MBA with a focus in organizational psychology, and then I moved over to the LVMH group, and I was very fortunate there. I spent over 5 years at Kate Spade and over 5 years at LVMH group, where I rotated through several different human resources roles across learning and development, recruitment, employee relations, and HR generalist roles. So what that basically means is that I spent a lot of time recruiting for all of the LVMH brands. I was based in New York, and I'm sure most of you know a lot of the LVMH brands are based in Europe. We did have several beauty and fashion brands based in New York, as well as subsidiaries. So any of the European brands like Louis Vuitton, Celine, for example, even if they're based in Paris, we have a small team of corporate employees here in New York. And then a lot of our focus would be on recruitment for the field. So stores, merchandisers, buyers, that kind of thing. After spending a lot of time there, learning the different areas of HR, I ended up starting my own firm. And I've been doing that now for quite a while. And so I do several different things as an independent HR consultant. So I consult for various brands, and I do retained search. So companies will hire me to recruit for very specific roles. Those tend to be director level and above roles. Sometimes I do C-level roles, presidents. I don't recruit a lot of early career professionals. However, I also do career coaching. So I do a lot of career coaching with professionals at all stages of their career, from students all the way up to early career, senior executives, and everything in between across all different functions. And often what people come to me for is to understand how to get ahead, how to stand out, what their resume should look like, what the LinkedIn should look like. Sometimes it's even to figure out what they should focus on. So if these are any of the questions that you have today, please put it in the chat, and one of us can try to address your question. But you can, of course, always reach out to me as well, to book a session in the future when you need help, and I'll put my contact information in the chat as well. Those are the core pillars of my business. So recruitment, HR consulting, and career coaching for professionals. I also started a networking community called the Collab at the very beginning of the pandemic. And that's something I'll talk more about later. I think networking is such an important part of your career path. And so I created a tool and a platform to help people in our industry connect, get visibility, learn, get access to, resources, clients, jobs, and essentially build a network of professionals. Because what I really truly believe is that networking should happen when you don't need something. Often it happens when you do need something, like a job. And so a lot of people do come to the Collab when they're looking for a job, and that's understandable. But I'm proud to say that most of our members actually have jobs. And so that's, some of them have switched jobs as members from one thing to the next. But, generally it's a very robust community of people helping each other, networking, doing brand collaborations, and so on. So that was a very lengthy introduction, but I have a lot to say. So I'm excited because, Eric and I have known each other for quite a while. Sasha and Nicole, I actually just recently met. So I'm really excited to dig into their introductions, hear a little bit about their careers, what they're focused on now. So Sasha, why don't we start with you? I'm going to mute myself, and audience, please feel free to put any questions in the chat too. And we can also try to address those as we go along. So Sasha, tell us about you.
Thank you so much, Kristy. And I'm so excited to be here today. I think this is a really great opportunity to talk to both early career and mid-career, and even, at different levels, professionals that are really interested in the fashion industry and how to break into the fashion industry and what does that mean. From my perspective, right, I'm at Tiffany & Company. I literally, I'm 6 months into my career at Tiffany, and I am loving every minute of it, I will say. My career is actually a little bit varied. So definitely a hard act to follow after Kristy kind of went through her introduction. But I started off my college career. I was doing psychology and global studies. I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I was very, very clear on that. I wanted to make sure that I was helping people in some way. And then I realized that maybe psychology wasn't for me, right? So I was trying to figure out what to do after college, and I was going through a lot of soul searching. And networking is key, right? As Kristy said, networking was the way that I found my first job, right? So I was doing a lot of internships. I was figuring out where I wanted to be. I was actually in DC. So I was doing a lot of congressional relations work, which is interesting. I didn't know that that was what I wanted to do at the time, but it's something that came to me, and it was something that was really interesting for the time. And if anyone knows, from a congressional relations perspective, you really have to know your clients, you really have to know who you're talking to, and you have to know what they want out of the situation, right? And so I think that really helped me later in life, when I actually went from congressional relations to consulting, to understand from a human capital perspective. I was doing a lot of HR, making sure that I was really connected to chief human resources officers across the federal government in my consulting career. And a lot of that was just listening to our clients, making sure we understood what they wanted and what they needed. And just like any fashion industry job, right? You want to make sure that you are selling to the consumer and making sure that the consumer is properly represented, not only in your products, but how you brand yourself and how you market yourself, right? And so I think in that sense, I think for me, what was really interesting about my consulting career was making sure that I was putting myself in the mind of the client and then giving them exactly what they wanted, right? And so, of course, there's a lot of varied approaches to that, right? I think from a human resource perspective, I was across the board, right? I was helping stand up onboarding programs. I was helping them recruit top talent. I was helping them think about their HR systems and making sure that they were actually beneficial. And I think that, those 4 years that I spent in the consulting world were some of the most transformational, times in my career. I think it's the first time I really got deep into my DEI expertise. It was the consulting firm I worked for really allowed me to be able to understand what are the fundamentals of what it means to create an equitable environment for your employees, what it means to infuse equity in every single part of the human resources process, right? So I think one of the things that was really important for me during that time was to make sure that I became a jack of all trades, and to make sure that my skill sets were so varied that I was able to be amenable and also be a sponge and soak up all of the good just knowledge that I could in that part of my career, and then transfer that to really what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. And so I knew that when I graduated from school, I knew that I wanted to work for a really big brand. I didn't know where that was going to take me. I didn't know what that would look like. So when, this opportunity at Tiffany came along, I kind of just jumped at it. I owned Tiffany jewelry before. I'd been very passionate about the brand. I know that has a long, long history of 185 years of just, being in New York, being that staple, creating what the diamond looks like. And just, being one of the, in my opinion, right, one of the top tier jewelry brands. And so because of that history, because of just the heritage of what Tiffany really represents, I thought it was a really great opportunity to be a part of a brand that could really transform what DEI means for the fashion industry. And so, when that came along, I think over the last 6 months, what I've learned is not only does Tiffany have a lot of influence, right, in just its brand itself, but also from a DEI perspective, we are on a journey, just like a lot of the other brands, a lot of the other corporations that you've heard about, over the last couple of years, right? I think, and this is the world according to Sasha, right? I think a lot of different brands have gone through kind of like a social justice reawakening, which is amazing to see, because it's one of those things that you hope for, especially as a woman of color, especially as a Black woman in the fashion industry. You want to have an environment where, people are going to look at you and say, okay, like, you are not only an asset, a value add to our organization, but you are just as equal, and you bring just as much to the table as anyone else. Your voice is just as valuable. And I think, to me, seeing that in different brands and seeing the journey that Tiffany's been on over the last, couple of years, and building up our DEI program and making sure that we have the key players that are going to make a difference is something that is just, I don't know, one of the most amazing parts of being a part of this brand. And so, of course, I started off in consulting. Well, I actually started off in professional relations, went to consulting. Now I'm in the fashion industry. So I have a different background than the rest of the panelists on the call. But I think one of the things that is really great about that is that what that shows that as you're starting off your career, as early career professionals, as you're thinking about what to do next, I think one of the biggest things is the sky's the limit, right? And you should be focused really on building up your skills rather than, I don't know, I want to take this one path, because you never know where life is going to take you. You never know what you're going to want to do 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, 20 years down the line, right? You might want to open your own consulting firm like Kristy, right? So I think, as long as you're working to build up your skills and making sure that you can be kind of a jack of all trades in that, in those different areas, I think that you will be, all set, right? In terms of current projects that we're working on at Tiffany, of course, they brought me in to help kind of form what the DEI strategy is going to look like from a global talent acquisition perspective, right? So when you're thinking about hiring pools, making sure that we have the right partnerships in place, making sure we're being a little bit more strategic and intentional about how do we build equity into our hiring practices, right? How do we make sure that we have diverse slates, but also diverse hiring panels, right? And then on top of that, really being intentional about our early career professional reach. So making sure that our internship program is a stellar opportunity for interns to really get that real world professional experience. And also for them to be able to say, I want to work at Tiffany. I love this brand. I understand the mission and I understand its goals, and it aligns with exactly what I want to do. And so I've been honored to be able to be, a part of the kind of transformation that we're going through from a DEI perspective. I've also been honored to be able to meet some amazing professionals that are early career in their internships. They're anywhere from, I just finished my freshman year of college to I'm in my MBA program, right? And so I think there is a lot of opportunity, not just at Tiffany, but across the fashion industry, to really get your foot in the door and to use this network that you're creating right now by being a part of this session to do so. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kristy.
Thanks, Sasha. I think your story, your career story, is particularly interesting to me because you have this expertise from a completely different industry. And we talk a lot about pivots and how to pivot and do something different. And I think it's interesting to note that the fashion and luxury industry at large is definitely interested in understanding and recruiting people from completely different backgrounds, different, industries, different experiences, if you have a very clear expertise. So whatever it is you're passionate about, I think there are some functions where you can transition, whether it's HR, DEI, marketing, there are different functions where you can transition from industry to industry. And I think there's a lot of learning there. I think we see product designers doing that less. Often we see ready-to-wear designers or footwear designers. They work for several different brands within the luxury sphere. And there, I saw there was one question about designing for luxury, so we'll revisit that in a minute. But I do think pivoting is possible. And I think the more clear you are about what your expertise is, what you're really passionate about, and the more knowledgeable you are on that topic or that function, whatever it may be, in terms of certifications, education, networking, career experience, really learning best practices, even from a variety of industries, it can absolutely be applicable to the fashion and luxury industry. So let's go down to Erica. And Erica, tell us a little bit about your career and what you're working on.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me on this panel. And I'm looking at all of these faces, and there's such amazing and impressive women that are speaking today. So it's my pleasure to also share my story. So I had a bit of a career journey as well. I knew that I wanted to go into HR. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it was HR generalist. I didn't know if it was compensation and benefits. I didn't know if it was recruiting. I was just trying to learn as much as I could and really be a sponge. So I went into financial services at the time, and now I'm going back almost 20 years ago, and I was looking at what everyone else was doing, but just trying to really find my way and find what I wanted to do. So I spent about 2 years in the financial services industry, and it was right around the recession. So it kind of gave me that fire that I needed to really reevaluate what I wanted to do and what I needed to do. And my manager at the time kept on saying to me, Erica, do you really like financial services? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. I like what I do. I'm working hard. And he was like, yes, but I see that there's more of a passion in fashion and beauty. I think that might be your interest. So after he said that a few times, it really just sparked a light in me that I really needed to find something else. So I found a new opportunity at Coach and spent about 4.5 years there. I led their internship program. I also recruited for all of the entry-level positions across the company, started out in retail merchandising, allocation, planning, and then really just tried to move around the organization and try to tackle kind of each part of the organization that I could, so to really round out my recruiting experience. And then in my last year at Coach, I was tapped on the shoulder by our head of human resources to take on a HR generalist role. So I didn't know a whole lot at that point, but I thought it was a great opportunity to learn a different facet of HR. So after spending many years in recruitment, going into the HR generalist side. So, and then also supporting an international business. So I did that for a year. I think after a year, I was really missing what was happening in the market, what was happening with candidates that I had spoken with over the last few years, what's shifting around in the retail space. So I really wanted to get back to that. So I actually saw an opportunity on LinkedIn, and I reached out to HR. I found out, I did a Boolean search and found out who the HR manager was and reached out to them directly and shared my resume. So it does work. I will say networking works if you really put yourself out there. And then started at Vince. So went from accessible luxury to more of a contemporary space. And it was right after the IPO. So it was an interesting time where we were still trying to find our identity at Vince and really building up the organization. The organization was also bi-coastal. So we had design functions and technical design all on the West Coast, whereas the East Coast had more of the finance, marketing, HR, and wholesale teams. And I spent about 2.5 years there, learned a lot. There's a lot that happens in contemporary. I feel like you're always chasing the trends, the business is always evolving. And after a while, I think after I did some self-reflection again, I learned that I really wanted to go into luxury and make that move. And I had interviewed at my current company, and it's been 6 years. And I think what I love about working in luxury is the connection to the clients. that client is really paramount to understand he or she's desires, and really connect with them on a deeper level. So our sales associates in our stores know their clients' birthdays, any anniversaries, any special events, and it helps them make that connection. At my current company, I moved from a talent acquisition role into now an HR generalist role, which I know that some of you would be questioning why I made that move again. It was to also further round out my experience, and now I oversee a team of generalists as well as talent acquisition for the US. So it really allowed me to grow and try something new and get outside of my comfort zone again, which I think sometimes you need to do to be able to grow in this space. And someone once told me that to grow, sometimes you need to zigzag to continue to move up in an organization. So I did that. And now I think what's really interesting me is what we call our early career professionals. So we call them our ECPs. And really gaining more exposure to them, understanding what they're looking for, what they're asking for, because they are a more vocal population. They will tell you exactly what they want and what they want from an organization. And right now, not only are we experiencing a great resignation across all industries, but really more so a great reprioritization. We're seeing that candidates are not afraid to say, I want flexibility. I want more benefits. I want more time off. They are actually raising their hands and actually dictating to us in HR what they're actually looking for. So right now we're trying to manage that, keep our employees engaged, and do what we can in terms of our policies to make sure that we are an employer of choice and our people are really happy here.
That's great. There's a lot to unpack there. I knew we needed at least 3 hours, but we only have one, so we'll keep moving. Nicole, let's hear about your focus and your career.
Sure, and I can certainly make this brief. It was, hi everyone, thanks for having me. It was incredibly interesting to listen to all of your stories. I can relate and see myself so much in all of your careers. Kristy, I started working in stores as well. I knew I wanted to work in fashion. I didn't know how or what it would look like from a really young age, but I knew I was telling my mom what to wear from when I was 8. So I was like, okay, clearly like there is a love for clothing, and she actually went along with it, which, was pretty gracious for her. And ultimately I started because I showed up to a retailer every weekend for probably a couple of months. And I was like, you are going to hire me at some point. Like, I'm just going to come here every weekend and eventually I will get a job. And it doesn't matter if I'm just opening boxes in the back. I don't really care. I love this brand so much. And I eventually, as you might imagine, did get hired there and worked there for quite a few years. I love the stores. I love helping customers. And as I think about my career, it's sort of what I describe as like an accidental HR professional. I've always likened it to sort of really still doing what I did on that sales floor when I was 16, only we're not talking about what your outfit is or where you're going or how I'm going to style you. We're talking about what your career is going to look like. But for me, the work's the same. It's really listening, it's really understanding and figuring out how can I help you. So as I've sort of accidentally wandered into what I interestingly think is almost exactly the same work that I did when I was very, very young, it's been fascinating to sort of watch that thread. I went to college for linguistics. I thought I wanted to kind of like Sasha work for the government and be a translator and travel the world, and really got into that and thought that doesn't sound as exciting as I thought it might be. And a really great friend said to me, have you ever thought about doing recruiting? You just seem like a natural fit for this. And so it was on the recommendation of a friend that I ultimately started working in recruiting. This is 200 years ago in the late 90s. So we were talking about the .com space. So, it was really focused around technology. If anybody remembers the gateway stores, I love to mention them because they're such a relic at this point, but really did a lot of focus in the tech space and went to work for some big companies like GE, really loved it. But fashion is clearly, not to sound super cliche, such a passion. I'm into the clothes. I'm a fashion girl. I've always been that. And so I really wanted to consider what a career in HR might look like from a fashion perspective. So spent quite a bit of time at Gap Inc. for a number of years, and then ultimately came to J.Crew. So it's, it's one of those things that I think there's always a second act or a third act or a fourth act, or how many acts that you would like there to be in your career as you think about what does that look and feel like. And I think to Sasha's point about having a specific skill set, you can translate and take that anywhere, which has been really, really valuable, I think, as I think about what I've been able to do. I've mostly worked in the TA space primarily for the stores. So that's the piece that I love. The customer piece is just sort of my favorite. But over the last couple of years, transitioned into the inclusion and belonging space, really thinking about what does that look and feel like for J.Crew Group. And those are things that for me, I've probably been doing informally this entire time, right? The work's always been there. The focus has been there for me. So being able to shape what that programming looks like, what the policy looks like, what our intentionality looks like in terms of inclusion and belonging for J.Crew is more formalized today, but the work has always been ongoing. So it's been an incredible career. And I will turn it back over to Kristy. Really quick, you asked, sorry, just to quickly highlight, what are we working on? We're working on a lot of things. I think from a TA space, we don't have a strong presence in early career. We do have an internship program, but relatively speaking, compared to a lot of other companies, it's pretty small. So I think we have a real focus on creative arts education is something that we've been trying to holistically look at across our entire organization. We recently announced a collaboration with Pensol Lewis College, if any of you are familiar with PLC in Detroit, D. Wayne and his team. We are doing an apprenticeship program with them for 6 Black or Brown designers that will ultimately design a capsule collection for J.Crew that we will launch next year online and in stores. So as we think about sort of what are the big and small ways that we can connect into creative arts to diversify that aspect of our specific team, it's been incredibly important to the design team across J.Crew and Madewell that we think very specifically about how do we create diversity in multiple aspects, but very intentionally in certain ones as well. And design and creativity and arts has been incredibly important to us.
That's fantastic. I don't know if anyone can, or if you can add that into the chat, Nicole, so we can learn more about that program and we can all look it up offline. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely.
I noticed that we have 14 questions in the chat, and I would actually love to tackle a couple of them and then ask some of the panelists to answer some of them. Some of them are specifically for panelists. I want to start by addressing can you connect to us on LinkedIn? And also how much does the design of a resume matter? How can you make a document that stands out, but is not distracting? So for those of you who are just starting to use LinkedIn, I want you to know that you have a limit of 30,000. I am at that limit. So as a recruiter, often we are very stuck. I'm going through the process of reviewing some of my connections that I made back in 2007, 2008, 2009. Do I really know these people? So, LinkedIn is a great tool. You really are supposed to only connect with people who you know. If you do choose to reach out to any of us here today, I think you should send a note that says, I heard the panel for Fashion Scholarship Fund, and make a point of, it's something you learned or something you said. I think it's always important to give some context to any of your professional outreach. So I can't promise that I can, that I have enough connections left for 100 people or more. But you can certainly try, and you can follow my Instagram as well, which is at @khurt Consulting and at Join the Collab. And that is a great way to get to know me. Whenever people reach out with a resume and want, information, I tell them to join the collab. It's very affordable and it's a great way to network, expand your reach in the industry, and get all kinds of help in your career. So the resume question, I love to talk about resumes and LinkedIn. Now, everyone will tell you something very different. My personal opinion, this is just my personal opinion, although I have been doing this for a very long time, I like to see a very clean one page that has career highlights. So I'll speak for myself. As a recruiter, when I am recruiting for a specific job, I am mainly looking for very specific experience that my client wants. So I know as an applicant, it can seem like there are thousands of qualified applicants for every one job, but that is not true. Usually, from my perspective, it is extremely difficult, and I have to reach out to hundreds of qualified people to find one that my client wants to actually hire. And that's because every single job is so specific and requires very specific experience and contacts. And you may ask, well, how do I get started if if I don't have that experience? And I think that there are lots of ways you can do that, and we'll get into that. But to start, I think what you should do is you should create a very clean template for your resume. Personally, I often refer people to Etsy.com. Etsy.com has a lot of very affordable resume templates. I am personally a fan of the 2-column, black and white, very clean, modern design, straightforward. What I'm looking for is the contact information, where this person has worked, and that includes internship experience. So I want to know companies, dates, titles, and the key highlights of what you have done or achieved in that role. Some of the key highlights I look for, let's pretend I'm looking at, say, a salesperson. I might, if they're working in wholesale sales, I might want to know how big was the volume of business? How big was the team that this person managed? Who did they sell to? What are the key partners, whether it's brand partnerships or stores that they sold to? So when I'm looking at a resume and I see, oh, this person worked at this brand, they did this role for X number of years. During that time, they worked with all these other brand partners and they managed people. And if they can tell me some quantitative achievements, that's amazing. So I, increase business by 30% by doing X, Y, Z, so a resume should always have qualitative and quantitative elements to it. If you've been featured in any press, you can link to that. You can link to your LinkedIn, you can link to your, email address. You can tell me your education, any professional, volunteer experiences that you've had. All of that stuff is really relevant. I also really like knowing a little bit about your personal passions. If you are a marathon runner, I like knowing that. If you are really passionate about anything in particular, please tell us, because I think that is one way that applicants can show that they have a lot of varied interests and that they're going to be a really curious person, someone who's really passionate about the job they're applying for, but then they also have this other aspect to their life. Maybe they love hiking, or they've traveled to, they've climbed, the highest mountain in the world or whatever. Like, that's interesting. And it's also a great icebreaker when you are interviewing, because if there's something really special or unique on your resume, the interviewer might grab onto that and say, oh, tell me about that experience. And then it makes everyone feel really comfortable. And, one of the best tips, I think, is if you can do so much research going in, like you've been into the stores, the product, you've seen all the latest campaigns, you've researched everything you can find online, you already know, the price point, the product, who the designer is, like, if you can walk in there with a very specific question that only really an insider would know, and the conversation immediately goes to talking about something that almost feels like an internal conversation, you are 20 steps above everybody else, because I guarantee you at least half, if not 80-90% of candidates come in not knowing anything about the brand, expecting to be told all this information, but you have all this information available to you online and in stores. So do your homework, come in prepared, even if it's just an exploratory conversation, because the more you know and the more passion you can show for that brand, that business, you understand way more than someone, just walking in the door without any of that information. You're going to do better in the job interview process. So I'm going to go, someone asked Sasha a question specifically. I don't know if you can see it, Sasha. I'm looking for it right now. Sabrina, yeah. Do you want to repeat the question and address it?
Sure. She said, hi, Sasha. It's so nice to meet you. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm currently doing a co-op at a fine jewelry brand and have fallen in love with that industry. What do you feel recruiters in that niche market are looking for from recently graduated students applying to work for a luxury jewelry brand? So, great question. I think I get this question a lot. I think it really does depend on what, specific industry you're interested in, right? So across Tiffany and Company, we have 3 different really big business areas, right? We have corporate, we have our industrial, and then we also have I'm blanking, industrial, corporate, and I will get to the third, but I'm a part of the corporate. So within corporate, there's a whole bunch of different industries, right? So we have our global marketing teams, we have our, in industrial, we have our manufacturing, we have, of course, HR within corporate, right? So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can transform kind of your skill sets that you're learning right now at that co-op brand into what you want to do at a big brand like Tiffany and Company, right? So you have to make that decision right up front to say, okay, I'm really passionate about design, for example, right? And I really want to make sure that my design skills are up to par and I can start to kind of like get into that specific area. And so I would, of course, recommend getting kind of some initial experience, whether it's, maybe doing your own design on your own or going back to school. There's always that option, right? And then coming into the industry and figuring out what's the best way. I think one of the things that we love from a recruiting perspective is those that are passionate, those that show that they know the brand, they respect the brand, and they understand what we do. And then on top of that, those that, have done their research. Like, I think one of the biggest things, and not just about the brand, but about their specific areas. I think a lot of the times specific candidates, especially from the early career professional group, will come to us and they'll say, hey, I'm not sure what I want to do, but I love Tiffany. And for us, that's great because we love that they love Tiffany. But for us, that also makes our job very, very difficult, right? Because we have so many things going on. Like I could say, oh, well, do you want to do systems engineering? Do you want to do finance? Do you want to do IT? And I will say finance and IT are things that people don't typically come to Tiffany to like be a part of, but we have a really great departments that you all can come and be a part of if that's kind of your major or your area of interest right now. So I would say really figure out where you want to be and then come with a plan, right? To say, I've really been passionate about global marketing for a really, really long time. I've been in the PR space. I would love to do that for a huge brand like Tiffany. Who do I connect with? And then we can get you kind of slotted in the right position. So what I'll say is do that soul searching that I was talking about earlier, figure that out, and then really create a plan and make those connections. So like Kristy was saying, like Eric was saying, and Nicole was saying, the networking piece is so important. And so making those connections also within those areas is really important as well.
Thank you. Nicole, do you want to take this one? How can you tell if a company has a good culture before accepting a role with them?
Definitely, for sure. And let me just add to Sasha's point around networking. I meant to say this earlier. It's important to not, yes, think of networking from a traditional sense, of course, but there's also very informal ways that you could be networking. And let me give you a good example. When I got the call from J.Crew about whether or not I'd be interested in hearing about the opportunity, their recruiter actually asked a candidate that she was trying to recruit from the company that I worked for. And the question was, who is the best recruiter that you've ever worked with? Of course, she said me. And that's why J.Crew called. So that when you think about networking, you're probably like, let me reach out to this person on LinkedIn, or like, let me make this connection, or let me go to this event. But it also has the opportunity to sort of come from a place that you've never expected. So as you think about every interaction, every phone call, every email that you might have with someone, it absolutely could be that networking that you may not be expecting that could lead to that next great opportunity. So just wanted to frame it outside of that traditional sense, because there's value there, but there's also real opportunity that could really come from a place that you might not be expecting. And I owe my whole career at J.Crew to literally that person naming me as their favorite recruiter, which I'm so grateful for. And in terms of sort of investigating culture, I think it can be challenging, right? Part of the interview process is, of course, the company really telling you about their organization. But the other part of that process is you sort of doing your own investigation to really understand, is this a fit for you in terms of however you define fit? And I think it's important to be really transparent about the questions. This isn't the time. I know you want to sell yourself and you probably are like, let them ask all the questions and I'll just sort of answer. But this is really the opportunity to uncover, does this feel like the right place for me? And what are the questions that I might need to ask in order to understand what I need to hear to determine if this is a fit for me as well? And so if I'm talking about thinking about candidates, I think there's a couple of things. What do you probably need to outline very clearly for yourself. So what are you looking for? Do you know what those things are? Because those will inform the questions that you ultimately ask. So when you think about culture, what does that mean? What are you looking for when you define culture for yourself, and what's a good fit? I think if you have that list of whatever that might look and feel like, then that will better inform the questions that you ask. My other piece of advice is ask every single person that you interview with. It'd be very interesting to see, do you always get the same answer, or do you get a different answer? So if you're curious about work-life balance per se, and you really want to make sure that you work for a company that has a great quality of life, so you ask maybe the recruiter, you also ask the hiring manager or the next level up, how do their answers vary should probably give you a really good indication of what's happening, right? Is it consistent, or are there variances? And if there are variances, where is that coming from, right? And so do you have the same expectations? I also think, depending upon the interview panel, if you have an opportunity to ask sort of the people who work for your direct supervisor. So the one of the questions I love to have my teams ask is, are you a micromanager? I bet every single person that's asked that question says no. Right? You ask the hiring manager, like, oh, are you? No, absolutely not. I love to give my team ownership. Great. Now, if you go and ask like 3 people that work for that person, do you get the same answer? Or are they like, oh my gosh, Sally is such a micromanager? So it's really sort of doing the investigative work and not being afraid to sort of ask the same question multiple times to verify the information. So I would say very clearly defining your list of what's important, whether that's company values, aligning to your values, what you envision when you think about culture, what research can you do ahead of time to determine some of those things ahead of time, and then multiply answering that question a few times to see if you can validate the answer is always helpful.
Great answer. Erica, there's a few, and I'm going to ask you to pick which one you want to answer. There's one about, the question was specific to EU work permit, but all of us are focused here in the US. So, we do interact a lot with candidates applying from other countries. So the question of how to navigate needing some kind of sponsorship. Another question, which I think we should address, feel free to tackle this one if you prefer, how to stand out if you've only worked in the store as a sales associate and you're applying for a role, either an internship or an entry-level role in corporate. So why don't we start with one of those two, or both?
Yeah, I can do both. So in terms of sponsorship, I know my company sponsors quite a few people. So we have lots of visa sponsorships. So I think what's most important for us is for you to be fully transparent as the candidate and letting the recruiter know that I do need sponsorship, or I'm currently on a visa. It expires at X amount of time or this date, but here's all my documentation. Because as long as we have that, our typical process is that we work with our immigration attorney to understand, is it feasible for us to hire this candidate? And not only interns, we have quite a few that are actually on sponsorships. So we have entry level, we have senior level. It really goes across the board. So if you have the qualifications, that doesn't knock you out of the process. We actually just want to ensure that we can actually take on that visa process in a legal way. So as long as we have all the information and we're not finding out at the 11th hour, it really does help facilitate the process. So we absolutely consider everyone that does need sponsorship. Now, I think the other question was
stand out if you're applying for a role in corporate and you've only worked in the stores. What is the way to stand out or go about that in a way that's successful?
Sure. So I think, we do hire quite a bit from our retail stores. So I think if you're in retail, it's making sure that you have that exposure to corporate. And if you're currently at a company, just reaching out to your counterparts, understanding a little bit more about those corporate jobs. And then it goes back to really doing the research on the company, understanding the function, understanding the job scope, understanding what the company does, going into their stores, and really just immersing yourself with that culture, because I think it's a really great transition. I love hiring people from stores because they understand how everything comes together. I think that if you've only worked in corporate, and unfortunately I didn't have the opportunity to work in stores, it's a little bit harder. It's an uphill battle to really understand what happens in those four walls to make that sale. So if you can come out of that and really understand how a store really operates, you are ahead of the game, and you're actually going to naturally stand out against other people. You may also want to look at different internship opportunities just to get a taste of corporate, to make sure that this is the right direction that you want to take, and start out that way. But coming from stores, there's such a career path into corporate, or if you want to stay within stores, there's also, it's not just sales and management. There's so many career paths within stores. We have a career path within clienteling, within CRM, within visual merchandising. There's so many different avenues that you can go into. It's not just being a sales associate or being a store manager.
That's a great answer. There are so many good questions. I don't know which one to pick next, but I'll just try to tackle a few really quickly because we only have 9 minutes left. So do's and don'ts after an interview. I think a lot of people have very different views on this. Some people still love receiving a handwritten thank you card. I personally think writing a thank you email is appropriate at this point. It also gets there much faster. And you should tell the hiring manager or recruiter whether you want the job. Do not say, thank you so much for meeting me. It was really interesting. Kristy, like that does nothing for you. If it is clear. So I personally believe that at the end of an interview, usually whether you got the job. I think that typically the hiring manager or the recruiter will be, if they're very interested in you, if they think that you are exactly what they're looking for, they will often say, are you available to come back for another interview? Or they will tell you what the next steps are. The next steps would be to meet this person and this person. If you remain interested in the position, please let me know. They might say, this is what our timeline looks like. If they're just polite and they say, thank you so much for coming in, it was great to meet you, that's probably a no. And you know what? That is a blessing, because not every job is for you. You do not want every job. I think one of the things that's really, really hard to learn, especially as you're starting out, because you might just be thinking, I want to work in the fashion industry and I need a paycheck and I'll do anything. That is not the right approach. The right approach is to really think about what brands you're really interested in, what function you really want to work in, what are you actually knowledgeable about, what are you really passionate about, finding out what you're really going to be good at and what you think you want to do in the future, and studying career paths, looking at mentors, talking to as many people as possible. We have a podcast for the collab. It's called the Collab Career Stories Podcast. Listen to that podcast. It's on, Spotify, Apple. The more study LinkedIn profiles, read job descriptions, go onto company websites. The more information you have and you read the job descriptions and the qualifications, it will tell you so much about what that person does, what they have to do to get there, how many years of experience they need. Often to get an entry-level job, you don't really need a whole lot of working experience. It is very helpful though, if you have internship experience, retail experience, proven passion for whatever it is that you want to do. I started out with the do's and don'ts after an interview. When you email the person to thank them, please tell them whether you want the job or not and why. If you decided during the course of that interview that it's not for you, then I would say thank you so much for your time. I've realized after our conversation, I want to go in a different direction, but I'd love to stay in touch. And I'm going to send you a LinkedIn invitation. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck filling your position. There's nothing wrong with saying that. you know? Alternately, if it went really well and you felt that they were interested in you as well, then I think it's really important to write back and to email them very soon after the interview and say, thank you so much for your time. After our conversation, I'm even more interested in the role, and this is why. And I would be thrilled to be considered for the next step in the process. Here's my availability. Please reach out to me. I can make myself available at your convenience, and then include your phone number. Don't make them search for your phone number. I think if you're job hunting, you should always have your phone number in your email signature at the bottom with your name. Maybe even your LinkedIn link, because you have to keep in mind that we get so many emails and so many candidates all the time. Sometimes we get an email from a candidate and we don't know, like, right off the top of our heads who that person was. So if we can quickly link to, click to your resume or click to your LinkedIn and see, oh yeah, now I remember that person. We talked about this and that. For me, I'm a very visual person. I need to be able to see, where they've worked. And then I remember certain aspects of our conversation, but we do meet so many people that it's hard to remember everything. All right. So we only have 4 minutes left. I knew we were going to need more time. Let's see. Marie and Anya, do you have anything you want to share? Because we could go on and on with these questions, but I don't know that we have enough time.
Actually, yes, I would love to jump in with a question, because I get this from some of the scholars and alumni occasionally that are interested in getting into human resources. To be in that area, do they need any specific certifications, or should they take classes if they don't already have experience in HR?
That's a great question. Erica or Nicole, do either of you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I can take it, and Nicole, I don't feel free to chime in also. But yeah, I mean, I think that if you are going into HR and you don't have any internships, that's okay. Because we've hired from HR, we've hired from people who have had internships in finance, or candidates who have had internships elsewhere in the industry. I think that that's completely fine. I think it really goes back to, why do you want the role, and what part of HR are you interested in? Because if you can explain that, and there are definitely different types of HR roles, and whether you want to be in front of a computer, you want to be in front of people and talking to people, if you want to be facilitating trainings, or if you want to be problem solving and working on employee relations, there's so many different facets of HR that could be suitable for you. So I think, going back to the question, having the experience, we actually in HR, we take chances. We can feel it in someone's kind of passion, their demeanor, and their overall want for the position.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I was going to say the same thing. The one thing I think that's beautiful about HR, it's incredibly democratic. You can come to it from anywhere. Most people don't have a degree in human resources. So that makes it really lovely. I also think if you're interested in TA, it is probably very, very much so a great place to get started. All walks of life. It just is a really incredible place to start. And I think, to Erica's point, there are so many different places. And so really trying to sort of uncover where in HR. I did employee relations for one day and I was like, nope, not for me. So you can really get a taste of sort of all of the different avenues, but it's an incredibly democratic part of the business and can really come to it from anywhere. And if I could just add to Kristy's points about do's and don'ts, if I could just offer a do before an interview: prep, please prep, and research, yes, but also ask the recruiter for help. What should I know going into this conversation? What should you tell me about this? Are there specific questions that maybe this leader would like to be asked? Or like just any information you can get from the person who is closest to the hiring team is incredibly beneficial. And so recruiters, to Kristy's point, are super busy. We might remember to prep you before an interview, but we also might not. So if we don't be afraid to say, hey, can we get 20 minutes on the calendar to prep before I go into this conversation? I want to make sure I'm incredibly prepared. Who do I need to talk to? What answers, do I need to be prepared to give? Is there anything I need to bring? Just having that sort of amount of prep in addition to LinkedIn research is incredibly helpful and might make the difference between getting or not getting the job.
Great.
Yes. That is a great point. And I think someone asked whether we can reach out or what, is it okay to reach out to the team? If you can find out who the team is and you want to try to send them a LinkedIn and say, hey, I applied to this job and I just wanted to connect on LinkedIn and express my, strong interest in this role. And then they can glance at your profile. Look, it might get you a foot in the door. It may not, they may not see it. They may not answer. Some people don't check LinkedIn, some do. You can follow their public Instagram account if they have one and DM them. Often you'll get an answer that way. A lot of people who follow my Instagram, K-Hurt Consulting, will DM me and we'll talk about things I post or trends in the industry. And I start to build a relationship with them. I highly recommend using your actual name as your handle, because often I'll remember that name, and they'll say, hey, I've been following your Instagram for 5 years. I saw you are recruiting for a specific job. I'm really interested and I think I'd actually be qualified. Can we chat? I'm like, sure. This person's been a loyal follower. I have a conversation with them all the time, every other week. So there are ways that you can actually get to know people in a way that is really low commitment, and they will actually remember you. So I think you can reach out, and sometimes there are a lot of applicants and sometimes they do get lost. And so I don't think you should ever sit there wondering, like, did they get it? Are they interested? Like, there's nothing wrong with following up. And as long as you always remain professional and polite, and it's okay to bump something up to the top of someone's inbox. Like, oh, we get so many messages from so many different directions now, Slack, Instagram, email, text. Just say, hey, I want to make sure you saw this. I'm super interested. What can I do to get to the next step to get 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever, on your calendar? So never feel afraid to follow up. And the worst thing you can get is oh no, sorry, we filled that role. Like, there's no reason not to follow up. We're past time. This was wonderful. I hope everyone learned a lot.
Yes, I just want to say thank you to all of you. This has been a great panel, and you shared such thoughtful responses to the questions and information about what you all do. So thank you so much. And last but not least, I just want to hope that all of our attendees that are watching this today will also join us on Thursday evening at 6:30 for our accelerated grant pitch night event. So please tune in then. And Kristy, I hope I'm one of the 30,000 that are in your LinkedIn
If not,
group.
I'll delete some I don't know.
Just delete one more.
All right.
All right, ladies, thank you so much.
Have a great summer.
Okay,
Bye.
take care. Bye.
Bye.